Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. Damien is up this week.
Yeah.
What are you bringing to the table today?
We're back.
We are back. We took a little break.
Yes, but we are back, and I am so excited to have brought our July book to the table for us to talk about today. And it is still July when this thing gets released. Yeah. The book we read a little while ago is called Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. And it was written by Dean Spade, who is an associate professor at Seattle University's School of Law, where his areas of focus include policing, imprisonment, race and gender, and social movements. And in addition to his work there, Dean also founded the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, which is a nonprofit law collective that provides free legal services to transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming people who are low income and or people of color. And so I feel like that gives him a lot of credibility here. He's got a lot of expertise and experience in mutual aid organizing, which to me helps explain why this book was so incredible. Dean does so much in this somewhat short book.
Yeah,
it's really short to describe what mutual aid is as an organizing tactic and strategy, talk about how mutual aid has been and can be used to help communities and people in need, especially in response to the crazy multi-layered crises we face. Yep. And he also highlights tips and resources and best practices for how to effectively utilize mutual aid to share resources, care for folks in need, and truly fight for the world that we all need and we all deserve. And to me, that's what makes this book so great. It's this handbook or guide, if you will, for organizers, but I think for all of us as we navigate the world we're living in right now. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kick us off by sharing how Dean Spade defines mutual aid at the beginning of the book. Thought that might be a great place to start. He says, quote, "Mutual aid is collective coordination to meet each other's needs, usually from an awareness that the systems we have in place are not going to meet them. Those systems, in fact, have often created the crisis or are making things worse. We see examples of mutual aid in every single social movement, whether it's people raising money for workers on strike, setting up a ride-sharing system during the Montgomery bus boycott, putting drinking water in the desert for migrants crossing the border, training each other in emergency medicine because ambulance response time in poor neighborhoods is too slow, raising money to pay for abortions for those who can't afford them, or coordinating letter writing to prisoners. These are mutual aid projects. They directly meet people's survival needs and are based on a shared understanding that the conditions in which we are made to live are unjust." So yeah, I thought that would set the stage for our conversation. So let's do it. Where do you want to start, my friend?
Yeah, it's such a great practical book that breaks down some of the mythos surrounding mutual aid and makes it tangible for people without making it simplistic.
Yes.
And in the preface to this new edition we read, Dean Spade says a lot to help shape what mutual aid is and what it isn't. So he says that, quote, "Care programs are just another face of the colonial project, a softer set of interventions that still leads to cages, whether they be hospitals, youth jails, gender-responsive prisons, or foster care group homes. These are the programs that are run by the state in one shape or another, or through state-sponsored organizations like nonprofits."
Right.
And Dean says that mutual aid is fundamentally different.
Yes.
He says, quote, "We seek autonomy from racial capitalism and the forms of domination it has forced upon most of the world, and we don't want to be conscripted into extraction and ecocide." So mutual aid sometimes looks similar to charity, but it's fundamentally different because it's resisting the way things are by creating new ways to exist with one another.
Right.
Which is how we talk about prison and police abolition needing new experiments to create the world that actually serves us all instead of the death-making, controlling one we live in now. And that's one of the foundational connections that I see between police and prison abolition, and mutual aid, and finding ways to meet one another's needs outside of the systems that exist that are causing us all harm.
Yeah, that's a great connection point there. And I think taking it a step further, or just saying it in a different way, I mean, it's just a fundamental aspect of what mutual aid is too. Those things are connected. And yeah, I really appreciated his work here to show us and to talk about the differences between what mutual aid is and what charity is, and how mutual aid is the way. I'm going to fast forward us a little bit into this book. I was really compelled by Dean's work in chapter 3, which was called We're All We've Got, We're All We Need. And that was because he talks about mutual aid organizing as a response to disasters and crises, and how mutual aid is necessary given that our government and our corporations are ill-equipped at best to respond to them in ways that actually help us in the ways that we need. And they are instead more interested in getting systems like capitalism back to normal, which we saw with the pandemic. He talks about that in the book. We saw it with Hurricane Sandy. He talks about that in the book as well. And so speaking to our government and corporations, Dean says this, which I just loved, quote, "Whenever we rely on a capitalist imperialist system to provide vital necessities, we can guess that the provisions will be fragile and inadequate and designed to transfer far more wealth toward the populations those systems were designed to support: white people, rich people, straight people, and men. Often the concessions are never delivered at all, only promised in an effort to quell resistance." That is absolutely spot on, I think. And later in the chapter, then, Dean highlights why mutual aid is so important in these moments.
Yep.
He says, quote, "Mutual aid projects let us practice meeting our own and each other's needs based in shared commitments to dignity, care, and justice. They let us practice coordinating our actions together with the belief that all of us matter and that we should all get to participate in the solutions to our problems. They let us realize that we know best how to address the crises we face. We don't need to be saved by professionals, government agents, or people elites consider experts. Mutual aid cultivates the practices and structures that move us toward our goal, a society organized by collective self-determination, where people get a say in all parts of their lives, rather than just facing the coercive non-choice between sinking and swimming, between joining a brutal and exploitative workforce, insurance scheme, or housing market, or risk being left in the cold." And I just loved that, especially the possibilities that can come from this kind of organizing work, which, I think we clearly need more and more of, given the struggles of the world right now,
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things I love in this book is Dean's attention to the parts of this kind of organizing work that gets ignored frequently.
Yeah.
Because it's inherently not interesting.
Yeah.
It's the meetings or the emotional labor in supporting someone who's frustrated or things like that. The behind the scenes stuff that's not
glamorous, not sexy.
Not glamorous. He talks about in this quote I'm going to read here in a second about, the thing you post on Instagram, and that this isn't the stuff that you post on Instagram.
Right.
This is that behind the scenes work that helps you get to the place where there's something to share publicly.
Yes.
So Dean says, quote, "We are used to being part of groups that ignore ordinary caring labor, much of which is seen as women's work, like cooking and cleaning and conflict mediation, while celebrating only the final outward-looking evidence of production, the big protest march, the finalized legislation, the release of someone from prison, the media coverage. We have not been taught to notice or care about how things went along the way to a victory, whether people's capacity for confronting the next challenge was improved, or whether it was destroyed through burnout or damaging group dynamics. Capitalism makes us think about short-term gains, not building the long-term capacity for all of our well-being. This can make it easy to go for a quick fix and ignore the damage we might be doing to each other along the way. Many of us think process is boring. Everyone wants a selfie with Angela Davis at the big event, but many people are less interested in the months of meetings where we coordinate how to pull off that event according to our values and handle the challenges of organizing." And I think that's such an important point.
Yes.
Especially in a book that is so clearly practical about what mutual aid organizing is and what it isn't, because the ends justify the means, that kind of thinking is so deeply ingrained. And he's touching on that here in that kind of capitalist thinking. And it's hard to see it when it's happening. We don't necessarily notice it until it's maybe there's a pattern that emerges or something. But we know that the way that you get to the end results actually matters.
Absolutely.
That's the work that you do along the way to get to the end result needs to be supported by the values that you have and ultimately what you want to see at the end.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're undermining your actual result in so many ways. And that's reflected in so much of what we read and talked about here, from Maurice Mitchell's Building Resilient Organizations article to that piece we read earlier this year called Our Prescription for Winning, Giving Organizers What They Need to Thrive, that was published in The Forge.
Yep.
There's so much that we've read and engaged with that says, no, this like short-term gain thinking, this just sharing what the end result is or only thinking about what the end result is fundamentally not the way to do things, the way to succeed. And I just appreciate seeing it in Dean's own words here, connected to what mutual aid organizing looks like.
Yeah, again, to me, it makes this book so incredible given how short it is. I mean, the amount that he jam-packed into this book, but yet it's still so practical and so thoughtful because he's talking about this with intention and that this mutual aid work and this organizing work, there has to be intention behind it. And so what you talked about there about caring for each other and talking about our process and bringing people along the way is such an important part of this that can't be overlooked if you want that long-term success. So I'm so glad you brought that piece up because it's a huge part of this book, and it can be overlooked. It can be difficult work to bring people along, to deal with their emotions, to deal with issues along the way, but you've got to do it if you want to be successful.
Yeah. It's helpful to me personally.
Yeah.
In the way that some of the work that I've been doing, to say, no, that work is work and it is important.
Yes.
Like it helped me also sit with that and feel good with some of the way I've been spending a big chunk of my time over several years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've been talking about that a little bit. I love it. I'm glad you're doing it and you're following the word here.
Trying.
So, speaking of the practicality of this book, the second part of this book, the second half, I don't know, was really great because Dean offers, really digs into the practical insights and resources and tips for how to start and maintain successful mutual aid projects and organizing, which again, I think makes this book so useful. And so one of the many things he talks about in this second half are some of the dangerous tendencies that mutual aid groups can face if they aren't careful. And so those tendencies are dividing people into deserving and undeserving of help, practicing saviorism, being co-opted, and lastly, collaborating with efforts to eliminate public infrastructure and replace it with private enterprise and volunteerism. And so I don't think we can talk about each of these tendencies in depth. He does a lot of work here. There's lots of charts and great stuff in the book, but I wanted to share a little snippet about each of them, and I'd love to hear any reaction that you have to them. So for the deserving and undeserving of hope tendency, Dean says, quote, even though mutual aid projects often emerge because of an awareness of how relief programs exclude people marked undeserving or ineligible, mutual aid groups still sometimes set up their own problematic deservingness hierarchies. For example, mutual aid projects replicate moralizing eligibility frameworks when they require sobriety, exclude people with certain types of convictions, only include families with children, or stigmatize and exclude people with psychiatric disabilities for not fitting behavioral norms. So that's that one. In regards to the practicing saviorism tendency, Dean says, quote, mutual aid projects and their individual participants must actively resist savior narratives. These ideas are so pervasive that even those who have a systemic analysis of vulnerability still sometimes fall into the trap. Most mutual aid projects benefit from an explicit ongoing effort to build shared analysis among participants about the harms of saviorism and the necessity of self-determination for people in crisis. As you talked about, that ongoing work there to bring people along. About the co-optation tendency, Dean writes, quote, mutual aid projects have to work hard to remain oppositional to the status quo and cultivate resistance rather than becoming complementary to privatization, which is great. And then finally, the dangerous collaboration tendency, Dean offers this, quote, mutual aid projects strive to include lots of people rather than just a few people who have been declared experts or professionals. If we want to provide survival support to as many people as possible and mobilize as many people as possible for root causes change, we need to let a lot of people do the work and make decisions about the work together rather than bottleneck the process with hierarchies that let only a few people lead. And I love that one in particular, again, because it's about bringing people along. We know what we need, and we need each other to solve these problems. And so, that's getting to that one. But I just thought all of these were really great sort of tips for organizers to keep in mind.
Yeah, especially for things to be on the lookout for and things to avoid.
Yeah.
Because, even when you think about the one that we didn't get to talk about much, eliminating public infrastructure and replacing it with private enterprise and volunteerism. And you actually touched on that a little bit with the privatization.
Yeah.
But that you think that might be a good idea because you recognize that what the state does isn't meeting everybody's needs.
Right.
But getting rid of that program is going to cause more harm than good. And so it's you can see how, it might be good that we get rid of that program because it's not doing the things that we need it to do. Mm-hmm. But it's doing the things we need it to do for the people that it's doing those things for.
Right.
So it's an expansion of the program, not a retraction of it. That is maybe the better thing to go. But still, politically, you could think, but maybe we don't even need that thing because it's not doing what, and the frustration in it not serving the people that you think it should be serving in the way that you think it should be serving them. But getting rid of it is ultimately worse.
And I think, that again speaks to this idea of having multiple voices present because I would love to be in a room where someone says that and we can have a conversation about it. Mm-hmm. And then it's, you get to the place where you need to be, but you've got to work it out with folks. And so that's great.
Yeah. And maybe it does make sense for certain things. There might be something that I'm like, yeah, sure, let's get rid of that. But for the most part, if we're talking about, I don't know, feeding people or whatever, it's like we're going to feed people less. We're going to ask the state not to feed people. I don't know that I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
So the second half of this book, as you mentioned, is even more practical than the first half.
Yeah.
He really highlights those tendencies that you mentioned, which give a lot of insight into how hard this work can be because it's literally undermining the world that we live in.
Yes.
And that's the point. And so Dean says this in a section about burnout. Quote, working to change the world is extremely hard because the conditions we are up against are severe. We cannot blame ourselves for having a difficult relationship to our work, even though we understand that learning to work differently is vital for our movements and for our own well-being and survival. We must be compassionate to ourselves and each other as we practice transforming our ways of working together.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and it feels so crucial to mitigating burnout because there's this tension to want to do as much good as you can while also recognizing the limits, but trying not to let the limits dictate everything. And so you're trying to push up against the limits and do all the things, but then you run out of gas.
Yeah,
you burn out.
At what expense? Yeah.
Yeah. What does it cost you?
Yeah.
And there's not always that recognition. And so that was one of the other sections or things he wrote about to look out for was burnout and how do we navigate what that looks like and giving ourselves compassion to recognize we can't fix all the problems that we're hoping to fix all at once. That has to be bits and pieces at a time. And sometimes that can be frustrating and, even push people away because they don't feel like you're moving at a fast enough pace or what have you. And so navigating all of that tension and all that relationship to the work that you're doing and the work you're doing with the people that you're doing it with is a big piece of that behind the scenes work.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
Well said, my friend. To me, the burnout piece of this book, I had to sit with for a minute. And I think a lot of folks listening can relate to that and that feeling and that experience. And so the practical advice he's offering there is so important. And it just made me think like, the whole second half of this book could be its own book. Like, tell us more, Dean. Please give us more. All right. Well, we're heading there already. Let's talk about application. How does this book and our conversation about it apply to our everyday lives and work? The whole book is application, but my specific application that I want to talk about comes from the conclusion, which is called "Everything is at stake, and we're fighting for our lives." Incredible title. I want to share what Dean says about why mutual aid is important and what the possibilities are for it as it relates to our future and our collective liberation. So Dean says, quote, "We might reach a level of mobilization where we free our own people from prison rather than asking that their captors free them, and where we'd redistribute stolen wealth rather than asking that it be taxed and spent differently. Our movements must contend with the structures in place in order to dismantle the weapons they use against our communities and simultaneously build new ways of surviving that are based in our principles of liberation and collective self-determination. We must imagine and build ways of eating, communicating, sheltering, moving, healing, and caring for each other that are not profit-centered, hierarchical, and destructive to our planet. We must practice co-governing, creating participatory, consent-based ways of cooperating that are not based in militarism. Mutual aid work plays an immediate role in helping us get through crises, but it also has the potential to build the skills and capacities we need for an entirely new way of living at a moment when we must transform our society or face intensive, uneven suffering, followed by species extinction." And there's so much in there that I think speaks to the intensity and severity of the crises we're facing right now on so many levels, at the individual level, as families, as communities, as a society, and as a planet. Our planet is literally in danger in so many ways because of climate change. And so I think Dean has done such a great job with this book in making the argument for mutual aid organizing as a way to simply help us all survive, and as a strategy within our larger organizing in our social movement ecosystem, as he refers to it as well. What about you?
Yeah, and that the element you said about using mutual aid organizing to survive. This book was published in 2020.
Yes.
It wasn't written in 2020.
Right.
He did not write it in the context of COVID-19 pandemic and the mutual aid that popped up after that. But he mentions it in the preface to this edition.
Yeah.
And how much people were able to look out for one another in new ways in the face of that crisis, and how there will just be more crises. As you said, our planet, the climate crises that we're all going to face in one way, shape, or form.
Yes.
Whether it's wildfire smoke visiting us here in the DC area or floods in the Appalachian Mountains, things that we did not think about as being climate catastrophes 10 or 15 years ago are happening now.
Every day.
And there's going to be a bigger need for us to be able to take care of each other inside of those crises, but also in between.
Yeah.
And that long-term work is also going to be really necessary.
Absolutely.
And we need total transformation of our society. Mutual aid is one of the building blocks for getting us to collective liberation. And so my application comes from a little bit earlier in the book. Like I mentioned, Dean helps differentiate between charity and solidarity work really effectively.
Yeah.
And he talks about how the charity model operates structurally, but also within us as individuals. He says, quote, "The charity model encourages us to feel good about ourselves by giving back, convincing us that we have done enough if we do a little volunteering or posting online is a great way to keep us in our place. Keeping people numb to the suffering in the world and their own suffering is essential to keeping things as they are. In fact, things are really terrifying and enraging right now, and feeling more rage, fear, sadness, grief, and despair may be appropriate. Those feelings may help us be less appeased by false solutions and stir us to pursue ongoing collective action for change." And so this is another thing that I think we have to struggle against, this kind of thinking that limits what we think that we can do, and the numbness that we have to our own struggles, our own suffering, and not even recognizing what that suffering is as a start.
Yeah.
Or that it exists. And then the next step is understanding where that suffering comes from.
Yes.
But we're not even at that spot yet.
Yeah.
Right? We're trained in this context that Dean is offering us. We're trained not to even feel it or notice it or think about it. that it exists.
Right.
We can't think about why it exists. That's too far. And so these are also the things that we have to struggle against. Is this charity model is another aspect of how we think about how we're supposed to move in the world and challenge these systems that ultimately are just putting a Band-Aid on a huge open wound.
Absolutely. Well, and it also just makes me think about, this system is also designed in a way for us to think about our suffering individually, right? And to not think about the fact that our struggles are connected too. So that's another piece of this too. That's so important. So I love that application. All right, let's talk about homework. What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work once we leave the table today? I definitely love to check out more of Dean's work. He's written another book that was published back in 2011, a long time ago, called Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of Law. So that'd be kind of cool to add to the bookshelf. And then Dean's also written for lots of publications, including In These Times, Signs, Social Text, and even the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is right up our alley. So I'd love to do a little search on him in there and see what he's written for the Chronicle.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I'll also say that Dean wrote a book called Love in a Effed Up World relatively recently. And so that is out as well.
Yes.
So that might be interesting to read. Maybe for the podcast, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just another thing to note, my homework is a book that Dean mentions in the preface. He says, quote, "In this time, I have found Vicky Osterweil's book, In Defense of Looting, immensely helpful. Osterweil argues that the most successful wide-scale resistance has been decentralized, not institutionalized, and willing to break rules and laws. Her book is full of real examples of massive disruptions caused by huge numbers of people acting in solidarity and with great courage in the face of uncertainty. She describes how, without a centralized institution or bureaucracy in the form of official unions or a party, even before anyone could communicate quickly across regions, people have undertaken massive riots, strikes, and looting to disrupt and thwart systems of domination and violence." And that sounds like a really great way to understand how resistance has actually happened over the course of history.
Oh, yeah.
Without all of the tech that we have and all of that stuff. So that sounds like a great book I would like to read. And somebody else recommended it to me recently online too.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. All right. Some good homework there.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's our conversation about mutual aid. Dean, thank you for writing such a great book. Everyone check it out. Aaron, you're up next time. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
I am bringing another article from the Forges series on corporate power. Ooh. This one is called How We Beat Corporate Power Before. And it's an interview between Adam Sengal, Ron Knox, and Candace Milner. In the introduction to the interview, Adam says that they will, quote, chart the history of monopoly power from Reconstruction through the last 50 years of corporate consolidation. Importantly, they will tell the story of how marginalized communities have always led the fight against corporate power by creating community-controlled alternatives before reflecting on current efforts to combat corporate power. So I'm looking forward to learning more about how this kind of corporate power has been challenged throughout history. They also get into talking about monopolies and some other interesting things in history of resistance that is really, really good. So looking forward to talking about that with you right here next time.
Continuing this great series from The Forge and liberation in a generation, right? So, absolutely. All right, well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.